Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to episode 155. Joined as always by Jason Buffington. I shouldn't just say always, but joined almost always with Jason. So, Jason, good to see you again. It is 155. You and I have been on the road.
Yeah.
Had a little opportunity to get a little bit of a sore throat going in both places, in Colorado and in Texas. And speaking of that, wherever you might be tuning in from, whichever platform you might be joining us from, go ahead and put in chat where you're viewing from. And of course, if you have a comment or a question, throw that in there as well. We've got a team that's going to relay that over to us. We'll check from time to time on our global map. We like to turn as much of the globe as we can green. Jason, this is a different type of a dive on custom research that we've done. Custom meaning it's industry agnostic. It's not Veeam customers. Custom also meaning that something that we went out and commissioned and culled from some different kinds of sources globally. But again, it has nothing to do with just Veeam customers alone, does it?
No, it doesn't. Let's go ahead and bring up a QR code. So just in case folks want to steal our own thunder for today, what you're looking at here is a research brief that's derived from data from 3 different independent research projects. So there was a project that happened in, I guess, November of 2022. So we're not quite a year old on that, called Cloud Protection Trends for 2023. And that survey looked at 1,600-ish. IaaS admins, SaaS admins, PaaS admins, and backup admins. Then there was another project, Data Protection Trends. We're going to cover a little bit of that today. That was 4,200. That happened in January of this year. And then Ransomware Trends, 1,200 organizations that all got hit by ransomware. Well, instead of thinking about it just as, one project after another, there's some really interesting corollaries that happen when you start to look at what do cloud folks think about cyber challenges and how pervasive or not is ransomware within cloud-based platforms. All those different types of convergence happens along the way. So we culled some data from each one of those. And so if you are a cloudy person, or a cloudy person, and you are concerned about cyber, because if you're in IT, you should be concerned about cyber, then this is where that brief should go from here. So collectively, I guess you could say it summarizes results across 7,000 respondents between the 3 data sets overall. So it was a lot of fun to put together.
Yeah, and should mention, this is global. This is not just Veeam customers. This is companies of a variety of sizes. So we've done everything we can to try to make it representative of the industry at large. And again, that number that you mentioned, Jason, 7,000 different organizations, not even 10% of which are Veeam customers. So it is truly meant to be industry agnostic. So let's double click on our first trend, our first bit of data here and see what we've got.
Yeah, so let's set the stage on this. So the chart on the right is, what we talk about every year. One of our favorite questions to ask every year is to really just understand the landscape on which you at home are trying to protect your data. And so what you're looking on the left-hand side, every year the survey asks folks, what percentage of your servers are physical? Those are on the left. What percentage are virtual? Those are in the middle. And then what percentage are cloud hosted on the right? We saw certainly 2020, there was a spike downward due to COVID. No one came into the office. And so you see that lift up for everything after that. And for the last 4 years, you've got actual data. Those are the 4 green bars. But every time the question is asked, we also ask, what do you think it's going to be in 2 years? And that's the version that we're looking at on that left-hand side, is what organizations were asked last year, what do they think their mix is going to be for 2024? For the first time ever, if the data holds out, more than half of all production workloads will be cloud hosted, right? Between IaaS and PaaS on Azure, Amazon, Google, pick your favorite other cloud, versus 48% are going to be on-prem, which is a pretty even mix between those, between physical and virtual. Dave, you know, we are so used to Veeam Green, and for us, you know, we all started with virtualization and VMs. But if we were only looking at VMs, we literally would be solving only 24% of most customers' problem. Take a look at that big, gorgeous blue wedge on that left-hand side.
Yeah, interesting things to myth bust there. One, the data center is not going away
Nope.
anytime soon, and nor should it, has always been our stance. There's valid reasons why you might want to go only to the cloud, but there's just as many valid reasons why you might want to remain on-prem or even develop in the cloud, bring data back. But I like how you mentioned that. You know, what's interesting is tipping point, we're slightly over half, meaning a little over half in the cloud. Data center doesn't go away. When the data center doesn't go away, it's a mix of virtual, physical. I always like to point out if it hasn't gone to a virtual platform by now, essentially end of 2023, practically 2024, there's a pretty good reason why that it hasn't done that. So in other words, it's probably going to remain those physical servers in your mix for the forecastable future. And really, to put a finer bow on what you just said, Jason, you have to solve for everything. No one hypervisor wins to the exclusion of all. No one deployment model or on-prem or cloud wins to the exclusion of all. So it's really an and.
Yep.
And if we learned anything from the pandemic, you have to be able to pivot for things which you might not actually be able to see right now with a great deal of clarity.
Oh man, there is so much wisdom in what you just unpacked. Let me react to a couple of those points. You know, one of our favorite stats is actually in the Cloud Protection Trends report. 88% of organizations said they brought data back from clouds as part of their core strategy, right? So there are going to be some folks that dev'd in Amazon, but they wanted to bring it on-prem. Right? There are going to be other folks that said, okay, well, maybe I started it on Google because that's where I have some extra resources. But if I'm a 365 customer, I probably have ACR commits with Azure. And so moving that data from even one cloud to another, or in some cases, as you mentioned, I may not have dev resources on-prem anymore, but I have applications that's where they have to run for one reason or another. And it can be science, it could be religion. But for whatever reason, people are moving data around. Right. And so what would be a pity is if your workload, when it's running on one platform, is well protected. And then because of the right business reasons, you've decided it needs to run on a different platform and it becomes underprotected. Right. That would be a true shame. Can I get an amen?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's kind of like the old notion of configuration drift, where you started off doing the right things. The landscape changed underneath you, as clearly we're seeing here it has. And just because these mixes, look a certain way doesn't mean 100% of those workloads, to your point, Jason, are staying where they are. You might dev and cloud go on-prem for production or vice versa. So there's still things shifting underneath that. You got to keep in mind where you're applying protection. But speaking of things shifting and applying things, let's take a look at the world map. I'm getting an update that we've got a few places that have come in. Let's see what we've got. So we always love when these big geos come in. Thank you, Canada.
There you
always
go.
Love that. We see Canada and the United States. We have all kinds of places. We've got Texas, Colorado, Georgia. Let's see, where else do we have? Connecticut and at least one other geographically challenged at the moment. Ohio, I believe. So then go around to rest of world. We've got Ireland, Italy, Hungary. Looks like France is also in the house. And we've got Egypt and Ethiopia, Oman, Saudi Arabia, United Emirates, and India. And I don't know if we've had Oman before, Jason.
Yeah,
That might be a new one.
I was just thinking to myself, that's such a fun country name to say. I don't recall Oman in a while. So a special and unique thank you for joining us this week.
Yeah, thank you to all. And feel free to keep comments coming in there. And if you joined a little bit later on, feel free to chime in where you're tuning in from. If you have any comments or reactions, feel free to throw that in there as well. So, Jason, let's tee up our next data point.
Yeah, so we just got done talking about the landscape of data protection and what is it we have to protect. Now, to your point, let's talk about the landscape of what you're protecting for. So this is one of our favorites. This is a little bit of a different cut than what some folks might have seen in the past. Um, but this asked organizations what were the causes of IT outages last year, right? Just straight up, what caused downtime? Right, and those are those long lines that you see on the right-hand side. I've done some coloring. We'll look at that in just a second. But then every year, for the last 3 years this report has been run, each year the respondents were also asked what was the cause of the most impactful single outage of the year. And you can see those in those short lines down below. Now, I know this is a little bit of an eye chart, which is one more reason you should go and download the brief because you can read it more clearly. The font is bigger. But here's a couple things to take away. Cyber, for the third year in a row, cybersecurity event was the most common. That's that obnoxious red line on the very top of the screen. And also, cyber was the cause for the single most impactful outage for the last 3 years running, which is what you're seeing in those short orange lines down below. Most impactful year over year. Three-peat. I wish we could get a baseball team to do a three-peat, but we're not there yet in the World Series. Anyway, we're seeing a trend here, and it's not a good one, Dave.
Yeah, when one of the sort of subtitles that I like to call this slide is why backup still matters today.
Yep.
And, basically your takeaway is if you just look down from the second listed all the way down, even if you can't see that, to Jason's point, download the report, you'll get these slides and, of course, a whole lot more goodness. But the real key takeaway, Jason, is doesn't matter after cyber which item you want to look at. The point is, in aggregation, there are many things. In fact, all of the same things that we've had to solve for in the data center in terms of things that could take down a server are still taking down a server. So backup matters because the stuff that we're used to going wrong for literally decades or half a century can still go wrong. Thankfully, with not huge frequency, but it still happens. And if you add up all of this, meaning events number 2 through the end here, it happens with enough frequency that several different things in a 1-year period are taking down your data center. And then you add on top of that a cyber event, to your point, Jason, and you've got a lot to contend with. I see we've got a question that's coming. We'll get to that in just one moment. Thank you, Anubis, for logging in your question. But Jason, one of the challenges here is the teams are generally really busy, right? Everyone's trying to figure out how they're lifting and shifting, expanding into new platforms, as we've pointed out in the previous slide. It's not that we're decommissioning en masse a number of things. We're not moving off-prem. We're not getting entirely off of physical, and the list goes on and on. So a lot to solve for, in other words, isn't there?
There is. Now, this particular brief was specifically written for those, cloudy people out there, which, as we have talked about, is 52% of most organization stand-up resources that are out there. So the other thing I would add to, as we think about not just cyber and not just fire and flood and hurricane and tornado and all the things that if you're in the U.S. Northeast, get ready for snow and power outages and all the wonderful things that have always been a problem in backup. But take a look at the 2 blue lines that are on our chart for today, because since this is read for a cloudy audience, we also want to look at specifically, turns out, accessibility. Being able to actually get to your resources was actually the number 2 and number 5 most common causes, right? So, Dave, I know that cloud is maybe less frequent of outage than say servers on Azure go down less frequently perhaps than servers on my data center in Dallas. But if you're the bad actor, I don't even have to necessarily stop you from, I don't necessarily have to affect the Azure servers. I can just affect your ability to get to them. Either way, you're just as offline from an inaccessibility of data perspective. So just be thinking about accessibility being actually a new critical component, something you didn't have to think about when you and your data were both in the same physical building.
Yeah, it's a great point. If we think about what constitutes a business process and therefore an IT service or a collection of IT services, it takes all of those things in order to deliver the needed capability. So To your point, the application's there, the data's still there, but if you can't get to it, or there's some other, critical component, such as like a web ordering system, everything's there, but the middleware to actually make this go, then for all intents and purposes, the server is down. One of the things I learned, and because this is sort of the last day of Cyber Month, October is Cyber Month, so we've got a little bit of a theme here. A very famous United States pipeline incident that happened from a cyber event not long ago. I don't know
Yep.
if everyone out there understood all this, but I was speaking to a cybersecurity professional recently. I, at least, did not understand that the bad actors did not shut down the oil transport mechanism. What they attacked was the billing system. The company made the decision to shut off the transport of oil because they couldn't monetize it. So these things have an
Oh,
interesting
wow.
cascading effect. Closer, to more recent times, some of us may have heard of actually a few different Las Vegas casino slash hotel hacks that have taken place. People were complaining about they couldn't get into the room with their electronic keys. The bad actors did not attack the key system. In fact, one of the systems, or one of the incidents rather, the bad actors purportedly said that they're doing this to draw attention to the fact that the information, customer information, client information is not being properly protected. As a result of that, though, the hotel, the casino shut down systems to try to assess where they might have been infiltrated that had the side effect of taking out a process. So to exactly to your point, Jason, the bad actors didn't stop the oil. The bad actors didn't stop the keys from working. What ended up happening, though, and if you want to call it sort of an endemic effect where the system sort of went into autoimmune response
Right.
trying to triage what had happened and took down a business process, which brings up a really good segue into our question from Anubis, who asked, join us on YouTube. His question, Jason, and I'll let you go first and I'll add on after. If you don't have budget, how do you protect your organization? I mean, if you can't protect 100% everything with the budget you've got for backup, for disaster recovery, et cetera, what should you do?
So I think a couple things kind of come to mind. The pithy answer would be you can't afford to not protect, right? So let me say what I mean by that. Let's say I walk out my front yard today and I notice that one of my sprinkler heads has broken and there's a huge geyser of water coming out of my front yard. I didn't plan this month to have a plumber or a handyman or somebody come and fix that geyser of water. But I know if I don't pay somebody to come and do that, then I'm going to have a stupid water bill next month. And I don't have that in my budget either. Right. And so sometimes when you think about the cost of a solution, the you need to go back and say, okay, so what's the cost of not doing this, right?
Mm,
So in our parlance, I'm a certified business continuity planner, and in our parlance, we call that a business impact analysis. So for every kind of thing that could go wrong, what would that cost if it did, and why? Can we bring back up the slide on causality for just a second? Because one of the things that you'll notice is when we look at some of the kinds of outages that are out there, like a hard drive died or an application died or something, when you lose an app, it doesn't cost as much as when you lose a whole site, right? So the business impact analysis would say a flood is going to cost far more than a down server, right? However, a flood is less likely than a down server, right? A flood happens every 3 to 5 years in some parts of the world, whereas about 40% of servers have at least one unexpected internal outage per year over the course of a year. So I would just tell you, I would always start with money talks, right? So start with the idea of what's it going to cost if you don't protect that data and actually turn that into dollars, right? That's the cost of letting the water just run down the street, or maybe wreck your house or do something else. Now compare that with the cost of hiring a plumber. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I liked your BIA or business impact analysis. Sometimes I probably mispronounce that acronym or misquote it as business impact assessment. But either way you look at it, if you try to go backwards from what would impact the business the most. It's sort of like the proverbial lifeboat exercise that some organizations you have to go through. It's like, okay, if in a world of scarcity, if you can't do everything, how do you start to try to place importance with some kind of a structure or a framework to try to
Yeah.
triage this? I like to use the phrase, you can't do everything, but you can do something. So anything that you can do, of course, is going to be better. I think of it as closing the aperture for the potential escapes that could lead to these types of potentialities that we see, whether it's cyber or some other kind of event. If there is a silver lining, Jason, to a lot of the cyber activity that we see taking place, in my mind, it's moving backup and recovery and disaster recovery from something that sounds like hygiene but deferrable, meaning like, no, I should do it. However, I
Yeah.
might be able to defer it this budget cycle, wait a little while, or whatever the rationalization may be. Cyber, though, is kind of amplified to literally a board level what the impact of do nothing is. The old saying, even if you choose to do nothing, you still have made a choice.
You've chosen. Yeah.
And yeah, you've chosen something whether you do anything or not. And as we're seeing in these research results, that has a real external impact. You know, if we think about just from a cyber perspective, to go back to the question, most of what we hear from other sources is that the breach occurs from some known vulnerability, with
Yep.
that vulnerability being in existence typically for a matter of years. So, just anything that you can begin to do to try to have better digital hygiene, to be able to have better backup and recovery or better availability is going to improve your hand. But I like your point, Jason. You know, this is just a matter of time. So you have to look at it. Are you willing to pay more later as the sort of trade-off for paying less today? With as this results show, essentially an inevitability about what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, let's double down on that. So, I made fun of hurricane and fire and flood earlier, right? So, like, if you live in the southwestern United States, fire is something that you deal with as a risk profile every summer, right? If you are in the U.S. in the spring, in the heartland, that's tornado season. I used to make I won't call it a joke, but I made an observation. I was down in Florida and we were giving a talk. And I said this particular zip code, on average, gets hit by a hurricane. A hurricane travels through this zip code every 2.83 years. It's been 3 years since your last hurricane, right? I mean, there is some basic math that the odds may be in your favor. You mentioned Vegas earlier, that you could roll your dice a couple times. Here's the problem. Last year, when the data protection survey was run, 85% of organizations said they got hit by cyber events at least once in the preceding 12 months. 85%, right?
Yeah.
If you go to Vegas and hit anything at 85%, that would be another reason to shut down the casino, right? I mean, or the other way around. The house always wins. You would not take those odds. And that's what that red line on that screen is telling us.
Yeah, well said. And not to be too self-serving, but the last bit of advice that I would have here is, download the report and use this as a way to have a conversation with the
Yes.
business to try to garner more investment. Again, this isn't a Veeam commercial. This isn't coming from one vendor. It's an observation worldwide. Do see that we've got a comment that came in, or a follow-up, I should say. And the follow-up is a lot of problems in Latin America or LATAM is that organizations don't hold as much budget in the US or Canada. Yep, I appreciate that.
Yep.
Which stakeholders use to tell there is no budget to support SOC-like operations. Yeah, that's true. I was just in Buenos Aires for Veeam on literally a few weeks ago and talking to a lot of our Latin American or LATAM team. And budget is a real concern. One thing that we're seeing, and now I will go into a little bit of Veeam speak, is that the ability to use subscription-based licensing helps reduce the overall license cost so you can deploy more protection sooner rather than having to pay for that all up front. And then, of course, the ability to being software defined, Jason, we're agnostic to the hardware. If you have to delay hardware purchases, you could do that. I know we want to get to one more research point, but Jason, I think you have a comment on the SOC as well.
Yeah, just the old school said, build a SOC, right? Build an operations center, build a center of excellence, build a management framework, and then start populating it with the various tools to accomplish those parts of your management agenda. I would tell you that today there's a lot of organizations that say, look, I would love to have the central pane of glass, I would love to have the dashboards, I would love to have all that other stuff. But Dave, to your point, a lot more enterprise grade management technologies are now being delivered as a service, one web UI at a time. And I would just encourage you to step back from what would be great in a SOC-centric global operations facility, and then look for what can be gotten by. Also, I'm finding that for a lot of organizations, renewal on old backup software legacy solutions, the renewal costs more than what some of the newer contemporary solutions in play can affect. So I think there's ways that you can save money, but I think the business case starts and stops with dollars. And I would always start with, what will it cost you if you don't? Dave, you want to do the map first, or do you want to get one last data point in?
Yeah, let's do both. Let's hit the map really quickly because we did have folks come in. And see California. In fact, people have even listed some of the people anyway have listed their cities in California.
Nice.
Folsom, San Jose, San Diego. We've had Panama, looking around rest of world. We've also had Switzerland, Argentina, Zambia, which may be a new one, Jason. Australia has also come in. That is one that always turns a great deal of the world green, so always appreciate that. Hats off to our colleague, Anthony Spiteri, who had flight troubles trying to get to Prague this week. So feel for him. And Jason, let's hit one more data point really quickly before we talk about what's coming up.
Yeah, let's do some myth busting here. So 2 questions that were in the ransomware survey. So this is 1,200 organizations, all of whom got hit at least once in the last year. So one of the questions that was asked in that survey was, what platforms actually got hit? And I'm going to say that's nearly a statistical 3-way tie. Windows laptop users, Windows servers, and cloud-hosted workloads. So I think there's a lot of folks out there that assume, hey, if it's not in my environment, maybe it's not as susceptible to the cyber villain. But if you're writing notes down, write this down. If your users can easily get to that cloud workload, so can the bad actor. Right. And so I do think it's interesting that you do see it's a near statistical tie on, it's just as likely that your cloud hosted stuff is going to get affected, because once the bad actor is in, they can go anywhere your users can. And so just, and again, that's why we want to do it and do this piece on cyber resiliency. The data on the right, we don't really have a whole lot of time for, but really just looks at how much data was affected. The left chart says the percentage of workloads, and it was pretty much the same. The data on the right, when you download the report, will actually tell you that the amount of data that got encrypted or affected was also nearly the same as remote branch office, which is always a myth, that they're less protected, as well as on-prem data centers. So, Dave, I'm going to channel one of the smartest people I know when he says you owe it to yourself to get smarter. And so hopefully this QR code helps for some new conversations with folks.
Yeah, I definitely encourage everyone to download the full report here. Again, it's not a vendor commercial. It is looking at 7,000 organizations globally, combining 3 different independent assets. And because it is the last day of Cyber Month, if we go to one last slide really quickly, we did last week have our Veeam Resiliency Summit. You can still register with that. A lot of great content, a lot of great speakers. It's not all Veeam speakers either. It's not all day, and you can go and choose the events that might be most appropriate to you, but some great stuff in there. If you are a Veeam customer, there's some specifics in there you might be really interested in, as well as upcoming capabilities. And looking ahead, this Thursday, November 2nd, our V100 show, Veeam 100, which is an event taking place now in Prague. We've got our colleague Anthony Spiteri that I mentioned. He's going to be hosting 2 guests, Christoph Poppy from Integre and Ben Young from vBridge, talking about AI for next generation support and content. Jason, you know Ben Young, who we last saw at Veeam in Miami, is doing some awesome stuff around AI and Veeam. And then 1 week from today, November 7th on Tuesdays, we're going to do part 2 of our cyber resiliency and hybrid cloud activity. Jason's going to be joined by Leah Trashanecki. Going to dive in a little bit deeper on some of these aspects as well. But in the meantime, definitely download the report. Thank you for tuning in. Stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the next stream.
In 2023, innovation fueled every industry, from renewable energy to space travel, all powered by data. The world runs on data. It's worth more than oil, and inherent value brings inherent risk. Natural disasters, accidents, and ransomware attacks are increasingly prevalent. Years of globally impactful work can be erased in an instant. But not with us. With Veeam, your enterprise becomes radically resilient. We give you the power to restore any workload, anywhere, anytime, instantly, so you can meet every challenge head-on. There's a reason over 80% of Fortune 500 companies work with us. We provide comprehensive recovery with tailored solutions that scale with you. When you partner with a global leader in data protection and ransomware recovery, you can bounce forward. Veeam. Radical resilience starts here.